Most people have quietly given up, and no one's noticed. Not their families, not their friends, not even themselves. They wake up each morning, brush their teeth, grab their coffee, and slip seamlessly into the machinery of daily existence. But somewhere along the way, something fundamental shifted. The fire that once burned behind their eyes has dimmed to barely glowing embers, and they've made peace with living in the shadows of who they once dreamed they could become. You see it everywhere if you know what to look for. It's in the grocery store clerk who mechanically scans items while staring through you rather than at you. It's in the commuter on the train, scrolling endlessly through content that neither inspires nor challenges, just fills the void. It's in the friend who used to talk passionately about changing the world, but now only discusses mortgage rates and weekend plans. They haven't died, but they've stopped truly living. And the most unsettling part, this quiet surrender has become so normalized that it's practically invisible. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. This isn't just about individual dreams deferred or personal ambitions shelved. This is about something far more profound and far more dangerous. We're witnessing the systematic erosion of human agency itself, and it's happening in plain sight while we're all looking the other way. The great philosopher Aldous Huxley once warned us about a world where people would love their servitude, where the chains that bound them would be invisible because they'd be forged from comfort and convenience rather than force. He understood something that most of us are only beginning to grasp. The most effective prison is one where the inmates don't realize they're imprisoned. Today, we're living in that prison, only it's not built from walls and bars. It's constructed from notifications and algorithms, from endless choices that somehow leave us feeling choiceless, from the constant hum of background anxiety that we've learned to mistake for normal. And the most tragic part, we've not only accepted this prison, we've learned to find it cozy. Think about the last time you felt truly alive, not happy, not content, not satisfied, but genuinely alive. When was the last time you felt that spark of possibility coursing through your veins? That sense that anything could happen and that you had the power to make it happen? For most people, that memory is getting harder and harder to access. It's buried under layers of responsibility, routine, and resignation. This quiet giving up doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process, almost imperceptible at first. It starts with small compromises. You take the job that pays the bills instead of the one that ignites your passion. You stay in the relationship that's comfortable instead of seeking the one that challenges you to grow. You watch the show everyone's talking about instead of reading the book that might change your perspective. Each choice seems reasonable, even sensible, in isolation. But collectively, they form a pattern, a slow drift away from the person you once imagined yourself becoming. The modern world has become remarkably efficient at facilitating this drift. We're offered endless distractions masquerading as choices, infinite ways to occupy our time that somehow leave us feeling empty. We're told that convenience is king, that friction is the enemy, that the goal of life is to eliminate struggle and maximize comfort. But what we're discovering, often too late, is that comfort without purpose is just a more pleasant form of death. And here's where it gets really interesting. The system that's created this mass quiet surrender doesn't need to force anyone to participate. It doesn't need guards or walls or explicit coercion. It simply needs to make alternatives seem impossible, impractical, or naive. It needs to convince us that this is just how life is, that expecting more is unrealistic, that settling is wisdom rather than defeat. Look around and you'll see the evidence everywhere. People spend more time curating their online personas than developing their actual selves. They know more about celebrities than they do about their own neighbors. They have strong opinions about fictional characters, but remain mysteriously passive about the real conditions of their own lives. They're experts at consuming content, but novices at creating meaning. This isn't about judgment. This is about recognition, because the first step to changing any pattern is acknowledging that it exists. And the pattern we're dealing with here is profound. We've created a culture that's incredibly sophisticated at managing symptoms while ignoring root causes. We have apps for meditation, but not for meaning. We have systems for productivity, but not for purpose. We have endless options for entertainment, but precious few pathways to genuine engagement with life. The tragedy isn't that people are choosing to give up. The tragedy is that most people don't even realize they have a choice. They've been conditioned to believe that this quiet resignation is maturity, that scaling back their dreams is realism, that accepting less is growing up. But what if that's not true? What if the very premise that we've built our lives on is fundamentally flawed? What if the choice between security and meaning, between comfort and growth, between fitting in and standing out, is a false choice? What if the reason so many people feel stuck isn't because they lack options, but because they've been trained to see only a narrow range of options? What if the life they've settled for isn't the life they have to live? Here's what's really happening. We're living through a crisis of imagination, not a crisis of resources, not a crisis of opportunity, but a crisis of our ability to envision alternatives to the status quo. We've become so accustomed to the current system, so embedded in its rhythms and assumptions, that we've forgotten how to think outside its parameters. We've internalized its limitations as our own. This crisis of imagination manifests in countless ways. People stay in jobs they hate because they can't imagine how else they'd pay their bills. They remain in relationships that drain them because they can't imagine being alone. They live in places that stifle them because they can't imagine starting over somewhere new. The infrastructure of their lives has become so complex, so interdependent, that change feels impossible, even when staying put feels unbearable. But imagination isn't just about dreaming. It's about seeing possibilities that others miss, recognizing potential that others overlook, understanding that the way things are isn't the way things have to be. And when imagination dies, something essential dies with it. Hope dies. Agency dies. The future dies, replaced by an endless repetition of the present. The most insidious part of this quiet surrender is how it disguises itself as wisdom. People convince themselves that they're being practical, realistic, responsible. They tell themselves that their younger selves were naive, that their dreams were childish, that settling is what adults do. But what if those younger selves weren't naive? What if they were simply more connected to something essential that we've learned to dismiss? What if the dreams we've abandoned weren't unrealistic but inconvenient? What if the passion we've buried wasn't impractical but threatening to a system that depends on our compliance? What if the fire we've let die wasn't meant to be extinguished but meant to light the way forward? This is the question that haunts the quiet hours, the question that surfaces in moments of unexpected stillness. What if there's more? What if this isn't all there is? What if the life we've accepted isn't the life we're meant to live? And here's the thing about that question. Once it surfaces, once it takes root, it becomes almost impossible to ignore, because deep down, in places we rarely allow ourselves to visit, we know the answer. We know there's more. We know this isn't all there is. We know we're capable of things we've never attempted, of growth we've never pursued, of joy we've never allowed ourselves to experience. The recognition of this truth creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. The gap between who we are and who we know we could be becomes painful to contemplate. So we develop elaborate defense mechanisms to protect ourselves from this discomfort. We rationalize our choices. We minimize our dreams. We reframe our surrender as sophistication. We become experts at explaining away our own potential. But something remarkable happens when you stop running from that discomfort and start leaning into it. When you stop treating the gap between your current life and your possible life as evidence of failure, and start treating it as evidence of opportunity. When you stop seeing your dissatisfaction as a character flaw and start seeing it as a compass pointing towards something better. This is where the real work begins, not the work of achieving some predetermined outcome, but the work of remembering who you are beneath all the layers of compromise and conditioning. The work of excavating the dreams you buried, not to resurrect them exactly as they were, but to understand what they were pointing toward. The work of distinguishing between the voice of fear, masquerading as wisdom, and the voice of authentic wisdom that knows you're capable of more than you've allowed yourself to imagine. Most people never do this work because it's uncomfortable. It requires admitting that the life they've built, the identity they've crafted, the story they've been telling themselves about why things are the way they are might not be the whole truth. It requires acknowledging that they've been complicit in their own diminishment. It requires taking responsibility, not just for where they are, but for where they're going. But here's what happens when you do take that responsibility. The world doesn't suddenly become easier, but it becomes more alive. Colors seem more vivid. Conversations become more meaningful. Possibilities that were invisible before suddenly come into focus. You realize that the prison you thought was locked from the outside was actually locked from the inside, and you've had the key all along. This isn't about dramatic life overhauls or grand gestures. It's about small acts of rebellion against the tyranny of settling. It's about choosing the book over the screen, the walk over the scroll, the difficult conversation over the comfortable silence. It's about asking different questions. Instead of, how can I get through this day? You start asking, how can I make this day count? Instead of, what do I have to do? You start asking, what do I get to do? The path back to aliveness isn't mysterious or complicated. It's about paying attention to what makes you feel more like yourself and what makes you feel less like yourself. It's about following the thread of genuine curiosity rather than manufactured interest. It's about choosing growth over comfort, truth over convenience, authenticity over approval. It's about remembering that you're not just a consumer of experiences, but a creator of them. And here's the beautiful paradox. The moment you stop quietly giving up, you become visible again, not just to others, but to yourself. The light that you thought had gone out was never actually extinguished. It was just covered by layers of dust and neglect. When you start brushing away those layers, when you start tending that flame again, something extraordinary happens. You remember what it feels like to be fully alive. The people around you notice too, even if they can't articulate what's different. There's something in your eyes that wasn't there before. There's an energy in your presence that draws others in. You become a reminder of what's possible, a living example that the quiet surrender isn't inevitable, that there are alternatives to the slow fade into gray. This is why your awakening matters, not just for you, but for everyone whose life intersects with yours. When you stop giving up, you give others permission to stop giving up too. When you choose to live fully, you make it easier for others to imagine that they could do the same. Your refusal to settle becomes a beacon for everyone who's forgotten that settling is a choice, not a requirement. Most people have quietly given up, and no one's noticed. But you don't have to be most people. You don't have to join the ranks of the walking resigned. You can choose to wake up, to show up, to light up. You can choose to live as if your life matters, because it does. You can choose to be the exception, the one who remembered that being alive is different from just being breathing. The question isn't whether you're capable of more. You are. The question is whether you're willing to claim it, whether you're ready to stop hiding behind the comfort of limitation and start embracing the uncertainty of possibility, whether you're prepared to trade the safety of surrender for the adventure of becoming who you were meant to be. The choice is yours. It always has been. And that might be the most liberating and terrifying truth of all.